Okay, we are recording. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning. I see we have Jenny and Crystal here. So welcome, ladies. And anybody else watching, we'll do a quick intro. I'm Sarah, and in the other square here is Cristina, and we're both from One Woman Shop. Today, so this is, I think, our third or fourth episode of what we're calling One Woman Shop's Hot Seat. And it's the first time that we're actually putting the other person in the hot seat. So I'm actually going to just be grilling Cristina a little bit, maybe a lot of it, on her journey to basically where we are now. So I'm super, super pumped about that. And I was going to go without giving her any notes, but I gave her like the most vague notes possible. So I think I'm still going to take her by surprise, but we'll see where this goes.
Yeah. Well, and just to add in, I think part of the reason that we decided to do this is because obviously we know a fair amount about each other. And just to remind everyone, if you don't know, we haven't actually met in person, even though we've been running One Woman Shop together for over a year, which is crazy. But every once in a while, something will come up and like one of us will say something and we'll be like, wait, what? I didn't know that. And so this is kind of our chance. I think we'll probably learn more about each other as well as we're doing these.
Definitely. And if for those of you that don't know, I know Coach Jenny there is the queen of blab, but if you're new to blab, if you want to ask a question of Cristina or myself, just type a / and Q and then type your question. And we'll definitely pay attention to the chat box on the side. So feel free to chime in, basically. All right. So Cristina, I have 3 kind of categories that I want to talk about when it comes to your past and your journey. And I kind of like boiled them down to your family, your education, and then your career up until this point. So I kind of want to start with education because I think that's actually the least of my knowledge, like what I don't know the most about you. So
yeah.
Tell us a little bit about your education.
Okay, well, I'll go way back. So before college. So I have somewhat of hippie parents. They don't look like hippies, but they like have hippie philosophies. And so I am a Waldorf child. And do you actually know what Waldorf is?
No.
It's kind of, I call it hippie school, but it's kind of like, because I'm such a hippie with my pearls, obviously. But it's kind of like Montessori. And what I loved about it is that it really encourages creative thinking and it really encourages like hands-on play. And kind of self-driven learning. And so who really knows how much that makes me the person I am today, because I was only there for a few years. But I definitely look back and I'm like, oh, like that, how I was in that environment is for sure how I am now. Very curious and very, I guess, proactive, even as a little 6-year-old.
Yeah, and so where was that to be in?
Like geographically?
Yeah.
Yeah, so North Carolina. So my dad was actually a teacher at the school before I started. And then I grew up in North Carolina, which I actually am in North Carolina right now, just visiting. So it's funny timing. And then I bounced around. I won't give you the whole overview of my schooling because it was a lot of change and a lot of like here and there. But basically I homeschooled for a few years. I went to a boarding school, not for very long, and public school and Catholic school. And then, so I bounced around a bunch, and I think that all those different schools definitely like brought out different parts of me and taught me different things. And then when I got to college, I was like, I'm staying in one college for all 4 years because I was like, I was so used to moving around so much. So, and then I started at George Washington in DC. So it was the first time I left North Carolina for an extended period, and I just was really ready to get out of North Carolina.
That's awesome. So it's really interesting because my best friend actually here she hopped around a lot of different schools, even had some homeschooling interspersed. And I always thought that was really interesting, especially because now, for those of you that don't know, Cristina's traveling around Central America. And she's kind of been placed in Guatemala for a little while. But before that, she moved around a lot. And I'm sure that, well, in my eyes, it probably, you're a little bit more comfortable doing that than somebody like me would be, who went to the same school with the same people for 12 years and lived in the same town. So I totally see how that could actually inspire you later.
Well, I know you're going to ask about family, but I find it interesting because it's sometimes the things that you are like, no, like I don't want to be that way. Like I don't want to copy that. Then you end up doing with your family. And so I definitely see that playing in as I travel. I'm like, I don't want to be moving around all the time because I want to have like a home base, but I'm moving around all the time now. And so it's just an interesting kind of
Yeah.
journey geographically and emotionally, based on what your family background
Sure.
has taught you.
So now we're at George Washington, and I know aspects of what you did in college, but I actually don't know what you went to college for.
So I decided before I got to GW, I was 100% going to do international affairs. And then I got to GW and I have no idea. It just kind of didn't happen. Like I just wasn't doing international affairs. And so I found this major called human services, which is like nonprofit management. A lot of people go to grad school from there. A lot of people end up just in the NGO world, maybe social work. And so that I was like, I found this, and this sounds so like cliche and naive, like freshman and college student, but I was like, I love volunteering. I like helping people. And so I'll do this major.
Yeah.
I could keep talking, but I'll let you ask questions.
Well, I hopped around a lot in college over 4 years. So it's awesome that you kind of found that right away. So then what did the next couple of years look like, and how did like the volunteering and the helping actually manifest throughout that?
So I basically found it pretty early. I'm trying to remember how I actually found the major and when exactly it was. But basically I did find it really early on and, started taking classes. So it was a really interesting, it was in the School of Arts and Sciences, so like liberal arts. And so there was, the language requirements, the science requirements, math, logic, all that. And then within my major, I had to do some sociology, which I loved. I took some psych classes, which I also find fascinating. And I still find those aspects kind of playing in with One Woman Shop and just everyday life and listening to podcasts about social psychology. And then there was other classes that were required, like child development and very little in terms of like the finances of a nonprofit and the marketing of a nonprofit, which is where I got really cynical. So yeah, I basically found within, I guess, probably my last 2 years, I would sit in class and I just found that a lot of times we were very focused on feelings and not on the practical business side of things. So what I decided to do is supplement my education with classes in the business school, which, little mini rant, I was always so surprised that the business school and that my major, human services, nonprofit management, had no connection. No, like, even though a nonprofit is technically a business, nothing. And so I was like, I need some hard skills. Like I need to understand finances and I need to understand accounting and I need to understand marketing. And so I took those classes in order to kind of round myself out.
Yeah, I'm sure. So did you actually travel at all while you were at George Washington, or is that something that started afterwards?
That is such a funny question. So if you had asked me my entire life growing up, like, will you study abroad? I would have been like, duh, obviously. So I get to GW, I'm like deciding not to do international affairs. I am not really doing anything with language, much to my mother's dismay, because she was always like, you are so good at languages, like you have to do it. So I wasn't doing anything with that. And it came time, every single one of my friends studied abroad. And I was like, I just don't want to. And I don't regret it because I'm doing it now. But so basically the reason I decided not to study abroad was because I was really involved on campus, especially junior year. And that's when most people studied abroad. And so I was like, I just feel like I have so much going on here. I'm not ready to leave it. And so I know you'll ask about this too, but one of those huge things was I had just started something called the GW Social Enterprise Forum, which was basically my way of dealing with the struggles with my major, was to kind of get really absorbed in the area of social enterprise, which, if you're not familiar, is the way I define it is bridging the gap between nonprofit and for-profit work by using business skills to solve social issues. And so super into this. I'm like, this is the cure-all. This is like the answer to everything. And so we basically started a student organization to bring different like nonprofit and for-profit leaders onto campus and talk about social enterprise. So actually, when I was reading Thrive.
Okay, no, that is awesome. And actually, I didn't know you did that, because my next question was going to be like when you broke into the entrepreneurial world, because I know that, you know, when I was in college, I didn't even have ideas of entrepreneurship, but I feel like for you, the seed started way earlier. So do you feel like that was the start of it, or did it even start earlier than that?
I totally forgot this until just now. I started a business in college. So I started senior year. This kind of answers your question, but I'll go back to your question too. Senior year, I went to Target and I just got in my first apartment, and I got all of this cooking stuff because I've always loved to cook. Like my whole life I've loved to cook, and I used to torture my family by making a nightly menu and then requiring them to order off the menu. There was no choice. Like there was just one thing, but they had to order it, and then I would deliver it to them.
You can come over and do that for me anytime.
Yeah, right. Thank you. You would appreciate it. My sister didn't appreciate it. And so, but I've always loved cooking. So I'm like on the Metro, and I've just gotten all these kitchen supplies. And I spent so much money on kitchen supplies. I should earn some of that money back. I should start a food business. I know what I'll do. I'll cook meals. No. Have I ever told you this? I was like, I'll cook meals and I will deliver them to students, because students want a home cooked meal, because we live in DC and the food is overpriced and there's nothing like our dining was terrible. So I started this like apartment based food business called GW Bites, and I ended up like hiring a guy to like deliver the meals for me on his bike. And we had like guest chefs which is actually really funny, because if I look at that business versus one woman shop, I'm like, the most success was when we would bring in guests to cook. The most success with one woman shop is when we bring in guests to collaborate. And yeah, it was really fun. I mean, it wasn't like super profitable or anything, but it was fun. I got some money back.
Yeah, no, I definitely didn't know that. I did know, though, that you did start a business with your sister, correct? So tell us more about that.
Yes. Okay. So, God, I'm like trying to decide which to say when. So basically, I will give you so this is just like this GWIs is just like a casual hobby. Senior year, I am deciding what to do with my life. I start interning with Living Social, which is a daily deals company in DC. And I'm in the research department working on like Excel spreadsheets. So basically, I'm deciding what to do when I graduate. And I go to my boss at the company and I'm like, I would like to work from North Carolina, work part-time, and switch departments. And they're like, all right. So I do all those three things. So I then have a plan to move back to North Carolina, and I know that I'll be working from home, and I know that I'll be in a new city, and that I'll probably kind of just struggle a little bit with working on my own. So basically this idea comes about that there's no co-working space. And if you're not familiar with co-working, it's basically just a shared office space for entrepreneurs and freelancers. So we're like, there's not really a space here. We should start one, because I was in need of one. And it just kind of all came about at the right time. And so my sister and I started a co-working space in Raleigh, in downtown Raleigh, and ran it for about a year. And then it wasn't, it was great in a lot of ways, but it wasn't. Co-working spaces are just really, really hard to sustain. Like it's a problem within the co-working industry. And so we basically, another big co-working space came into town and was like, you guys, like we can be competition with you, or you guys can come on board with us. So we were like, this is a really good time to go on board with another company and have like less of the responsibility of running the space.
So that's actually while you were working full-time for Living Social. Part-time. Okay. All right. So then Then take us through the progression of what happened with Living Social. And I know I'm probably skipping around your timeline, but that's because I don't know your timeline. So correct me if I'm jumping too much.
No, that's fairly like so far. Yeah, I'm in college, deciding what to do after college, running this business. We kind of close up shop with the co-working space, which was called the Raleigh Forum, which was kind of a play on, so it's a forum as in a meeting place, but also our last name is Roman, so it's like the Roman Forum, because we're clever like that. And so then I moved kind of into full-time work after we closed up the co-working space. I moved into full-time work with this company. And all of a sudden, / not all of a sudden, I get a call and I'm laid off. And so they laid off about 400 people, like 10% of the workforce. And I'm 23 years old. And I'm like, well, this is weird. Didn't expect to be laid off at 23. But I will say I had it, like, I wouldn't say easy, but relatively easy. Like right out of college, I had a job that let me also run a business. So it was like, I don't know, when I did get laid off, I was like, up until that point, I hadn't really struggled that much with my career. And so I guess I don't know, I guess in life, my career has always been like the thing that's like goes the smoothest for me. So yeah, so I'm laid off.
Yeah.
Should I keep talking? I'm laid off and I'm like, all right, I'm like, what should I do? So I don't know if I ever told you this either. So I decide that shameless Cristina, I'm going to write a blog post about it. So I write this blog post that's basically like, here's the situation. You know, I'm not bitter. I'm not upset. I had an amazing time working for the company. I learned so much. This is what I want to do in the next steps. And if you can help me, I would love it. So I write this blog post and I schedule it. And I wake up the next morning, nothing. And I'm like, okay, well, like, it's not like I had a super popular blog. Like, that's okay. No, I thought people might care a little bit, but no. So I look, and I hadn't actually sent it out. It had messed up on WordPress, so it hadn't sent out. So I like send it out, and all of a sudden, I'm just completely inundated with people. Like, I was so insanely blown away by the response. Like, people were so kind, and I guess I was a little bit insecure just because getting laid off, it felt like I wasn't fired, but it still had that kind of feeling. And people I barely knew on Facebook were like, my company's hiring, like, you can talk to us, or like, I know a recruiter, talk to them. People were just, it was really, really cool. And then it got picked up by the Washington Business Journal, who basically, I was the only one out of all of the people who got laid off who said anything publicly. And so they kind of just latched onto the story because they were like an insider's point of view. So they linked to it, and that was the best day of my blog ever. And, so it was just this crazy response, and people being like, you know, this girl was like, my boyfriend's mom runs a clothing company. Like, she would love some help with social media. And just kind of, I feel like I put myself out there, but the response was just amazing. Like, I don't feel like I deserved that level of response, but people just kind of started coming to me and were like, you know, we run a shoe company and we would love your help with social media, and just like all these different opportunities.
Did you find that, you know, when you got, this is really interesting, because I was actually laid off when I was 24. So I don't think we ever really talked about that.
What?
Right.
Spoiler alert.
But I'm wondering, like, on that day or in the immediate time following it, were you already thinking like, I'll start my own thing? Or was it kind of like, I have to start looking for the next thing?
So I basically did like a very Cristina move, and I imagine you probably did something similar. I'm totally going to ask you about it next time. I made like spreadsheets, and I was like, what kinds of companies would I want to work for? Like, in Raleigh, because I was living in Raleigh. Like, okay, social media, community management, like what kinds of roles would I be interested in? And I just basically like brain dumped, and I think I did it. I'm pretty sure I did it that day or maybe the next day. Like there was really no gap. I wasn't like sitting around crying. I was like, get to work. Which is just my reaction. And if you were laid off and you need time to deal with it, I obviously, each his or her own. And yeah, so I just kind of thought about all the different like skill sets I had and the things that I'd be interested in. And then it still hadn't, I guess at this point, even a few days later, it still hadn't occurred to me, like, I'll just start my own business. When these freelance opportunities came to me, I thought of it as this will tide me over until I find work.
That's really interesting because, like I said, like I didn't have any idea that you could do this stuff and build a business around it. And it's like once it clicks, it's like, why didn't I think of that so much sooner? But when you're in the thick of things, that's why I was really curious if like you were already in that mentality because you had already started some businesses, or if it was just kind of like, all right, I need to get my ducks in a row. And I know you're totally like a get shit done type of person. So of course you're going to take that first day and just be like, let's figure this out. Okay. So take us through kind of what happened after that, especially with like what you, with the Washington Business Journal, picking it up.
Journal.
I was going to say review.
So I'm just like, it was just this crazy few days of me making my spreadsheets and people contacting me. And, I came from, when I had switched departments at the company, I switched into recruiting. So I'm getting these like recruiting opportunities and I'm kind of like, I don't know, like, making cold calls all day in a recruiting agency. I'm like, no, that's not the direction I want to go. So that was definitely one epiphany. And then I had something I was gonna say, but I don't remember. But basically these opportunities are coming. And I remember talking to my sister and being like, this epiphany finally comes. I'm like, do you think I should like start a business? And it's the same exact thing that she said to me when I was like, should I go travel? She's like, kind of seems like a no-brainer. And I feel like I kind of started a business out of necessity, just out of kind of circumstance. But it also like, once I started thinking about it, then I was like, okay, like I have no mortgage, no kids to take care of. Like my barrier to entry, like if I'm going to do consulting, I need to pay $13 for a website. There's not a huge investment. I just kind of felt like the right decision. And also I will say within these few weeks, like after getting laid off, I was like, how can I use this opportunity for good? So I decide it's definitely selfish. It's selfish and selfless, but I decide I'm going to go on this guest posting rampage about what I've learned from being laid off. Cause I was like, this taught me a ton. And I think it could absolutely help people to prepare in case they get laid off, after they get laid off, all that. So I start pitching sites like Levo League, Daily Muse. So some of my first like bigger guest posts were during that time because I was like, here's a situation that could happen to anyone. People don't feel like it's going to happen to them, but I didn't think it was going to happen. I assume you didn't think it would happen to you. And I was like, I'll just use it. So I guess if we're taking actionable advice from this, like anything that happens to you is probably going to happen to someone else. So
again, like we always say, shorten that learning curve for other people, right? Okay. So this is about the time that you started CMR Strategies, correct? And that is how I actually found you. So when I found Cristina, she was consulting on behalf of CMR Strategies, and she was doing a lot of career coaching. And so that's when I was actually looking to transition into full-time solopreneurship. And that was my first contact with Cristina. So that's super exciting. So then like a month later, I find out that you are starting One Woman Shop. So tell us kind of how that seed got planted.
Yeah. So I'm running CMR Strategies, and it's my initials because I'm clever. And I was actually just explaining this to my sister last night. She's like, wait, how did you two meet again? I was like, what? So my business was Oh, hot mess. But I don't regret it. I actually wrote a letter to myself, and so I'll post it probably on One Woman Shop at some point. But it was like my business was all over the place, which is bad in some ways, but in some ways, like, got me exactly where I wanted to be. So I create this productivity e-course because I'm like, I love being efficient and productive. So I create the e-course, and I'm consulting one-on-one with clients on things like blogger outreach and digital marketing and some project management. And I'm coaching and I'm speaking. I decided I wanted to be a speaker. And so I pop up the speaker page on my site and I start pitching myself. And so I'm like going to student orgs at the colleges nearby, and I'm just doing all these different things. And so
just where the seed for One Woman Shop came from, yeah.
So I'm running this. It's just, like I said, a hot mess. And then I get this email from Alexis Grant, and she has started The Right Life. And it's a multi-author site where she's basically facilitating a bunch of people around one topic. And I start thinking, I'm like, I should do that. And so I'm like, I think one of my strengths is kind of community building and I love cold outreach. And I don't know why, I just love emailing people out of the blue. And so I'm like, okay, I could do this. I'm like, I can organize people around a topic. I'm like, what's something I care about? And then, like, almost immediately, I'm like, I'm a young single woman running my own business. Like, there are resources to some extent, but I was like, there's no like one place where that is the focus, is running your own business. So I'm like sitting there, I'm like, notes. I was telling someone this story. I was telling you, maybe, I think I was telling you this, about how this is July 15th, 2013, the day after my birthday. I went away for the weekend for my birthday, and I came back, and it's Monday morning, and I'm reading Alexis's email, and I'm like, I'm going to start this website. I'm like, what should I call it? One Woman Shop. Okay, is that domain taken? Okay, the domain's not taken. Great. I know. And I Googled it. I'm like, okay, this is the phrase people know, but yet no one has really captured it. I was like, right. That's the perfect thing. So, and then I'm like, so I buy the domain. I bought One Woman Shop and One Girl Shop. I'm really glad we went with One Woman Shop. So then I'm like, what should the tagline be? This is all within one day. I'm like, going in alone shouldn't be lonely. Okay. And then I'm like, okay, I need I need to like get a waiting list going. So I go and I find Blue Chic themes. And I find they used to have a free theme that was basically just like a waiting list. And I'm like, great, set that up. I'm like, how am I going to spread the word about this? I'm like, okay, well, I had to reach out to people who are already doing this, who would feel passionate about it. And I was like, they can be ambassadors, and they can like send out social media posts. They can send out emails. And then they can be some of the people who are write the first posts. So I started emailing people, I think that day. Yeah. And like, it sounds so easy, and like, to be honest, that day was really pretty easy. Like, it just kind of fit, but I want to give the caveat, the last 2 years have not been easy. Like, it takes a shit ton of time to build up a business. So like, that one day of things falling into place is not necessarily reflective of the whole rest
I think that's
of the
like
2
the
years
perfect
of building a business.
How we kind of talk about, we don't necessarily believe in the law of attraction, right? Because we believe in doing the work to actually reap the rewards. But that is like the perfect example of everything you did up until that point brought you to that day, right? So it wasn't that it was super easy that day. It's that you had learned a ton leading up to that day, and you had been through those experiences. And then everything seems to come easy that day because it just like fits so well. And now, of course, it's been quite the journey since then. But that is really interesting. So for those of you that don't know, we celebrated our anniversary on July 15th, even though the site launched in September, and now I see why. It's like that day is really when it was born. Obviously, I can't even imagine like being in your head that day. It must have just been awesome. But so I actually had, I think, my call with you the career coaching call in August. So there's like this progression. And then I think my first reach out from you regarding One Woman Shop was September. So that's really interesting that it was actually like a 1, 2, 3 thing. And I had no idea.
Well, it just really goes to show you, and I say this a lot, and like when we were talking about this with coaching when we were on our last lab, is sometimes like you just can't force it. Like you look back and you're like, holy crap, like it's so insanely amazing, like the way that you and I found each other and the way that it all like came together bit by bit.
Oh, yeah.
But like sometimes you just can't plan that, like you didn't think this would happen. I didn't think this would happen. And it just goes to show you, like, work really hard, but also just kind of, it sounds so cheesy, but trust the process and just kind of like trust that you're moving in the right direction. And it's the same thing I say with my business, is it was all over the place, but now all those different aspects have kind of come together in One Woman Shop.
I know we're already at like the half hour here, and we could probably talk for days. But one of the other things I wanted to touch upon is that if you don't mind sharing, that you still do work part-time as a contractor for the company that you were laid off from. Because the reason I bring that up is because I think it has actually transpired some really nice things for One Woman Shop. Okay, so one of the things that one of the very first posts, we started working together like last spring, 2 springs ago. And one of the posts you wrote right around that time was how to cultivate resourcefulness. And I still share that post because I'm just like, it's such like one of those things where you're like, do I need to write this? Because it seems so like everybody should know this. But you read it, and every time I get new ideas, or I'm like, why didn't I think of that? So that is one of the things that has carried me through, is knowing that as a solopreneur, you don't have to know it all. You just have to know where to find it all. So can you talk about that and really how that relates to what you do as a contractor too?
Yeah, for sure. So I think that recruiting has taught me so many things, and if everyone could do like a 2-month stint in recruiting, I feel like they would be a better professional in everything. So basically and I'll give some context about how I ended up back there at the company that laid me off. So basically I think at this point I'm running One Woman Shop on my own still. Timelines are so confusing. And I basically was like, I love One Woman Shop. I really want to focus on it. It's not raking in the dough. Like I'm not, on a private jet yet. And so I was like, I love working on my own, and I love the freedom and the flexibility and the autonomy and the creativity and all that. And it would be really nice to have something to balance that, to have a boss, because people hate on their bosses, but sometimes it's really nice to have a boss, or if you don't have a boss, an accountability partner, just someone to sometimes tell you what to do. And it is really nice to have a steady income sometimes. And just all these aspects that I wasn't necessarily getting from One Woman Shop, that I was like, I really want to balance it. So I started poking around, and I was like, what am I good at? Okay, well, I came from a recruiting background. So I reached out to my old boss, who I still had a good relationship with, which is huge point of advice. If you ever get laid off, keep some of your relationships. And don't burning bridges. Don't get mad or anything. Don't burn your bridges. So he's like, did you think about reaching out to the company? I was like, that is so obvious, but no. Which is another reminder that sometimes the things that are obvious should still be said. So I contact him. So I contact the company, and they're like, yeah, we'd love to have you back part-time. So basically I have this thing that perfectly balances and complements One Woman Shop. And I think that a lot of people tell you, with something you're passionate about, running a business, you have to commit all of your time to it, and that has to be your only focus. And I kind of disagree, because I think that we talk about this sometimes, coming from a place of financial instability and emotional stress is probably not going to help you run a great business. And I think that some of the most successful examples we see of solo business owners are people who gradually move full-time into their businesses. like coaches who started with a few coaching clients and then moved full time. So, but I think that the number one thing I've learned, sorry, I'm just going to forget. The number one thing I learned is just be resourceful. So I do sourcing, which is basically finding people for the really hard to fill positions. So one, I've gotten insanely comfortable with cold outreach and with contacting anyone and presenting an opportunity to them and hoping that they say yes. And if they don't say yes, or if they don't respond, following up. So that's a huge thing that carries from that work, from recruiting to one-woman shop, is like always follow up. And we learned that with the Solopreneur Success Bundle with our affiliates. We had a lot of people who just didn't respond the first time, and the second time we reached out, they would respond. And then it also is just about, there's this point with all my recruiting work when we haven't found a perfect person for the position, and I've run all the basic searches. So I still have this post that I have to write for One Woman Shop about like advanced Google searching. So I run all these searches, and then I'm like, I hit this point always. I'm like, that's it. I found everyone, every qualified person I've already reached out to. And then I'm like, well, I didn't, because the role's not filled. So I can't really tell my boss, like, sorry, I'm done. So then you go back to the drawing board and you get really freaking creative about how to find these people. And in my case, it requires like a different Google string. But it just makes you really think in creative ways. And it doesn't sound like I'm on LinkedIn all day. It doesn't sound creative, but you have to get creative. And so that we were talking about this the other day, like Marie Forleo always said, everything is figure outable. And so I think that is something I've learned from recruiting that I definitely carry over to One Woman Shop, is like,
I actually think you used the Marie Forleo quote in that Cultivating Resourcefulness. Yeah, I'm posting that link here. It's just so, I love that too. But I mean, that is exactly it, is that even if you don't know, there are ways to figure it out. And that is what I think that you absolutely bring to the table. Much more than that, obviously. But when we've worked on specific projects for One Woman Shop, the ability to just think creatively about who we're going to reach out to, how we're going to do it, and how we can work with those people obviously comes from those experiences. So that's like obviously something that I appreciate from, and I've learned from nonstop from you. Yeah.
Thanks. Yeah, and I would say another part that has to do with that is basically this understanding that it's a huge web. And there's like these rabbit holes, and I think it's a really important skill to be able to follow the rabbit hole and then find your way back out. And so what I mean by that is, like with recruiting on LinkedIn, for example, like LinkedIn will show you similar profiles. So there's a pretty good chance on the similar profiles, there's a person I should be reaching out to. So I have to both follow up the original person, then I have to find the similar profiles. And from there's other similar profiles. And then there's just all these millions of directions you can go. And that's how it is online. Like maybe you're following someone on Twitter, and then you look at their followers and you want to follow their followers. And it's basically just like seeing that everyone's connected. And if you kind of find yourself in the right place, you just kind of have to keep going
absolutely.
down that.
I mean, and that's kind of how I look at everything that we've talked about, is that it's all kind of this web where, and I feel a little woo-woo here, but like all of those things kind of led you to where you are now, right? So, and the other thing that I wanted to bring up, but we don't have to talk too much about it, is really, and I'm just laughing because Cristina had me absolutely fooled that her mother was Mexican one day, and that's because that is mostly because I was tired, so I was a little bit too gullible. But I really did want to talk about family, and you touched upon how your sister was kind of joined you on your entrepreneur journey at the start. But also, I'm really interested in how your family kind of motivated your travel now too.
So it's really interesting with my sister because she is a behavioral therapist for kids with autism. And so everything comes down to, like, if you've done a psychology class, like positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement, positive punishment. And every time I talk to to her about one of her teaching. Like, it's the same thing. It's all basic human behavioral principles.
Oh no, we've lost our hot seat. I guess after 40 minutes, they say that's probably enough, huh? All right, I will give it just a minute here.
You hear me?
Yeah.
That was so weird. The internet just totally went out.
I thought you were not in Guatemala anymore. No.
Yeah. Apparently, internet issues are worldwide.
Yeah, so we were talking about basic human principles, and then.
But anyways, I was just saying that I think it's a funny connection that like my sister's work and my work kind of align. And in terms of family, my dad has lived in Costa Rica since I was 13. And my mom lived in Guatemala for a while, and she also lived in Rwanda and Senegal and Tunisia. And it's so funny. I was talking to someone about this the other day. It's like you kind of sometimes end up where you are despite your parents, sometimes because of them, sometimes despite them, and sometimes just randomly. And so I always think about this. I'm like, why? Like, did I end up in Central America because both my parents were there? And I think the answer is no to some extent, but it has to be yes to some extent, obviously. And so I told you, like, when I was in college, I wasn't doing language and I wasn't traveling, and I just put that stuff on hiatus. And then once I started, I kind of reached this point when I was living in North Carolina where I was like, this is just not, like, I'm not happy, and I don't want to be here. Mm-hmm. And I decided to travel for 3 months, and that was over a year ago. And I just find it funny that there's like sometimes where you don't know that that's what you wanted. And I'm in Central America now, and I love it. And I'm taking salsa classes and speaking Spanish. And it's not what I thought I wanted, but I love it.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm certainly grateful for it, because I think that's when you were leaving for that 3-month trip, that's when you kind of asked me to do a little bit more work for One Woman Shop. But it's awesome to see that. First off, like, it's very interesting to me because, like you said, most people will do their study abroad in college junior year. I think it's really interesting that you chose not to because you were so involved with certain things on campus. But now you've made it your lifestyle now. And it's not to say it will be your forever lifestyle, but you've made it that now. And I can just see the difference in your attitude and what it's brought for you. So it's really awesome.
And so I cannot express, like, I am so happy, and I'm just like you said, I might not always live abroad, but it's just been absolutely incredible.
Yeah, and we will do an entire other blab on that for sure. I'm sure that can be like another 4-hour thing. But really, so I think it's awesome that you've shown, like, that you had these ideas so early, but kind of the path you took was not straight by any means. Mm-hmm. Is there anything else, like, top of mind that you're like, if I could share this one thing from my journey, I would want people to know this?
Gosh, I know we covered.
I know, I'm totally putting it on the spot there.
No. I'm just like thinking, I'm like, what are like the Cristina principles that, like, I want everyone to know? And, like, resourcefulness, we talk about that. I always give that as like a number one piece of advice. And then I just think, again, not to sound too woo-woo, but just trust that things, like, if you work hard and smart, not just hard, but smart, and put yourself out there in different ways, that, like, things are gonna come together, and you'll look back and like, God, I feel like I'm at like the end of my life and like reflecting back on life, but like, but you look back and like, it just, those things just, you see this very clearly how you got where you are.
Yeah. Hindsight is 2020, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And just to, I don't know, I think back sometimes and I'm like, wow, I like really, like that situation was so, like, it felt so intense. And I really, like, in the moment, it was like the worst thing ever. And I look back and I like I'm like, oh wow, like it just wasn't that big a deal. And so not to say like don't feel the emotions, but like know that looking back, it's not going to feel like as big a deal. So maybe in the moment, it shouldn't feel like as big a deal.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I guess my last piece is just, it's just business. Like, yes, it's your livelihood and yes, it's very important, but at the same time, like it's just business. And when you look back in like 2 years, you're not going to be like, oh, remember that typo in that blog post or like that typo in my subject line. So
maybe I will, because I am that. No, I'm just kidding.
Talk about that. We'll talk about you.
No.
Yeah.
Those are great lessons.
This is so fun, and I'm so excited to interrogate you.
So
I'm gonna do it right now. Every time we get off a pod, I'm like,
yes. No. Thank you so much for sharing everything.
Good question.
So, yeah. Cool. Well, next week we'll be back, same time, same place, 11 a.m. Eastern. Christina's in the States for a couple weeks, so she'll actually be on our time zone, my time zone, I should say, which is super exciting. Oh, is that pumpkin?
No.
Okay.
I'm saving my pumpkin spice latte for this afternoon.
Okay.
That's 2 Starbucks in one day.
Because you can.
Because I can.
All right.
No, thank you so much. Great questions.
Thank you.
Yep.
Talk to you soon.
Okay.